All right, here we go.
This is proof right here, guys. If you're watching this, you will not meet nicer people. Whoops, I'm going to point. There and there. You will not meet nicer people.
Coming back to a show that I dearly love and admire. So thanks for having me.
It's like, that's Big Starklighter's helmet. So how did you know? Because I'm a nerd.
I've placed information vital to the survival of the rebellion into the memory systems of this R2 unit.
But, I was doing my research, and Wedge was obviously a character that you had to use if you were going to do Rogue Squadrons.
What are you doing, C-3PO? I'm taking one last look at my friends. These aren't your friends.
Cassie and Jim on the beach, and people are like, no. I can literally hear people that go, no.
It doesn't look like they're even hungry. When they get out, they're not just like, did you bring a Snickers or something? There's no logic to it. And then later, when we haven't even talked about the Wilford Brimley of it all.
The same thing. Sears never left me again. We're such soulmates that her being older and me being older was exactly where we were meant to be.
Because Darth Vader was the scariest thing that had ever happened to anybody, and this guy literally looks like the devil.
You or do not. There is no try.
What's the big question people have? Like, what's the thing everybody's wondering about? What's the thing I don't understand? What would I want to hear?
The galaxy isn't growing to push people out. It's growing to let more people come in and find their love so that it's able to continue and create this connective tissue.
It's good to know that people still love it out there and that the people who made it are all proud and passionate about it and willing to come back.
It was a mess, dude. I had to wear a patch for a bit. We went to see Star Wars that night because I said, no, I'm going. We have to go. And I went to see Star Wars with a huge thing on my eye.
I like to denote people as daddies from time to time. And I believe that you are a certified daddy. Like Pedro Pascal's a daddy. Like, certified daddy.
I have had the best time ever on Around the Galaxy. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome. We are joined by Gary Whitta. Gary, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. That intro video is very impressive. You've had some good guests on this show.
Oh, thank you very much. And we're adding to that by bringing you on today.
I know. I'm in very auspicious company here.
Well, now the pressure's on us to make sure that we live up to that intro. That's kind of the way that works there. So, Gary, thanks for being with us. For those that may not know, maybe let's start with a little quick question. What are Star Wars fans going to know you for, and what's something they might not know about your career that they might go, oh, wow, that's really interesting.
Okay, so I'm probably best known as the co-writer of Rogue One, a Star Wars story. I'm one of 4 credited writers on the film. And I also went on, after I was done on Rogue, I went on to work on 2 seasons of Star Wars Rebels. I wrote 4 episodes across seasons 3 and 4. I also wrote the Marvel Comics adaptation of The Last Jedi. And I have stories in 2 of the Certain Point of View trilogy short story compilation books in Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. So my weird little kind of Star Wars brag is that if I'm wrong, no one's ever corrected me. I think I'm the only person who's ever written Star Wars for film, television, books, and comics. So that's like my little unique claim to Star Wars fame. And I guess the thing that people might not know about me is I come from the video games world. I had a whole career as a video games journalist for many years before I became a screenwriter. And I still love video games. I still host video game podcasts, and I play all the games, and I'm very vocal on social media about the games that I'm playing. And I'm still like a video game fan at heart. And I've done like story consultancy and writing work in various video games over the years as well. So I have that whole other side of my life outside of film and television.
Yeah, I've been following your comments on Starfield. I just started playing it, and I'm starting to see what you're talking about from the encumbrance thing. It's really annoying,
and I'm glad to. Well, I'm not glad to see, but I was relieved to see that it wasn't just me being like an RPG noob. I mean, I thought after I was complaining about it, I thought a lot of people said, "Well, that's just how RPGs are. What are you, some kind of noob?" But no, a lot of people who are familiar with RPGs and games sometimes have a limit to how much you can carry, and some don't. This is one of those games that does, and it's real. My big complaint is it's really, really restrictive. Like you're almost immediately maxed out on how much you can carry, and then you can't run around without getting exhausted. You can't fast travel. My suspicion is that Bethesda will patch some kind of fix to it. Like they'll make the encumbrance, the starting limit, a little bit more generous, or find ways for you to kind of manage your inventory a little bit. Because right now it's making the game not fun. It's clearly there's a really cool game there, but I don't want to be messing around with like, oh, I can't carry all this stuff. I got to drop these items. Like that's not a fun thing to have in a video game. So hopefully they'll make some changes to it.
Yeah. And I think another thing that where I started, you know, of course, I knew you from Rogue One as a major Star Wars nerd, and but you tell us a little bit about animal talking, which I think is one of the most unique concepts that came out of the whole pandemic.
Yeah, that was my COVID project. Like a lot of creatives, a lot of us were just like I am now because I'm on strike, right? Like a lot of creatives are now kind of benched again and looking for something to do with their time, and we all were back in 2020, like during the dog days of the pandemic. You remember all the movie sets were shut down because nobody knew yet how to deal with COVID. Eventually they brought in protocols and got back up to speed, but for a while there, like everyone was just sitting around like wondering what to do. And I was messing around with streaming video games on Twitch. Animal Crossing New Horizons came out that year. And you may remember it was like considered a godsend. Like so many people were stuck at home and miserable, but like Animal Crossing was like this escape that everyone could like disappear to this like fun kind of island paradise where everyone is your friend. And like the worst thing that can happen is maybe you get stung by a wasp. Like it was such a antidote to the how much the real world was sucking, that Animal Crossing had this like huge cultural moment. It was super popular. And I was messing around just live streaming, playing the game on Twitch. And like, there's a longer version of this story, but the quick version is I ended up building a kind of a replica talk show set, just trying to kind of recreate like a classic late night, Jimmy Fallon, Johnny Carson type talk show. And I dressed my little character up in a suit and made him into a talk show host. And it was so much fun that we actually started recording real talk show episodes. I would have like celebrity friends come over and sit on the couch in their Animal Crossing characters. And it kind of blew up and people were like really tickled by it. And the next thing you know, I had like real celebrity publicists calling me, because all the actual talk shows, if you remember, all the talk shows were shut down as well, right? And they couldn't really operate properly. And there's a lot of celebrities sitting around with nothing better to do. They can't act in their movies, right? Because all the sets were shut down. And so I was able to get access to people that wouldn't usually like consider going on a show like this. And we ended up with, Brie Larson, Selena Gomez, performed live on the show. We had Gorillaz debuted their new single on the show. Like a lot of big, Danny Trejo, T-Pain, like so many big guests came on the show, and it was a really cool thing. And I think at one point we had like 750,000 people watching us live. It was ridiculous. It was a lot of fun.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that when I look back on the pandemic, honestly, for us as podcasters, we encountered the same thing. We had the opportunity to reach out to guests who, just like you said, were home and looking for things to do. And of course, the advent of Zoom and StreamYard and all those things, it made us realize we were all more connected than we thought we were. And so, watching those episodes,
well, if you remember, for a while there, like you couldn't buy a webcam. They were all sold out, right? Because everyone was going out. Everyone was getting into video games. Everyone was buying webcams and setups, both for, not just for Zoom, but like a lot of people got into streaming as a way to kind of connect with people while we were all, so isolated in real life. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was great. If you're interested in watching it, anyone out there wants to check it out. It's all the episodes. We don't think we did like 20 something episodes. Are all on my YouTube channel. Oh, I forgot Sting was on the show. Sting performed music live. It was absolutely insane. We had Kevin Smith on that same show. He was a huge Sting fan, and he was just like freaking out because Sting was like sitting virtually on the couch next to him playing live music. And it was just wonderful. It was like a little bit of magic. I still can't believe that we did it. But my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Gary Whitta on YouTube, all the episodes are archived in a playlist there if you want to check them out. They're really fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've watched a bunch of those, and I highly encourage anybody that wants to check them out. It's a ton of fun and very creative. And I think I even saw you tweet weeks back, maybe there was a threat that maybe we were going to get Animal talking back during the strike. Have we made it far enough?
I toyed with the idea. I think we're kind of too deep into the strike now for it to be a useful idea. I wish it was an idea that I had like the first week of the strike. Sure. And we don't know how much longer it's going to drag on. Like some people, there's like optimistic, maybe, September, maybe this month, or, because it can't drag on for much longer. It's unsustainable, particularly from the studio side. What are they going to do? Just stop? They're just not going to make movies. There's just not going to be any movies in theaters anymore. No, they have to figure it out. But the question is that going to happen sooner or later? It may I took a very kind of pessimistic or a cynical appraisal of it, and I just said I'm just going to assume that I'm not going to work again until next year. Like it might not be until Q1 next year that we're back at work. I hope it's not that long because I want to get back to work, as everybody does. But yeah, if I think it wouldn't be a big deal for me to rebuild the set and like get it back up and running again and kind of remember like all the weird tricks and things that we came up with in order to do the show. And of course, a lot of celebrities again are now sitting around, right, with nothing to do because they're not acting in movies, just like they weren't during the pandemic. So we could have brought it back, and it even could have been like a good way to like talk about the strike and the issues. And I don't know, we'll see. I just kind of feel like here's what will happen: I'll put a bunch of effort into building it, and then right as I'm ready to go, the strike will lift, which will be great. I want to get back to work, but like, I would have wasted my time. I wish I'd have thought about it. Like I said earlier in the strike, it is a cool idea. There are certain people out there, if they said if they wanted to come on, I would probably do an episode just for them because they're like, I'm huge big fan. And we'll see. I never say never, but I also am like one of my big kind of rules for the things that I do is you never do the same joke twice, right? You do that. It's never. That's my thing. Is I think if you brought it back and you tried like for example, I'm really worried about that Frasier reboot because I love Frasier. Frasier is one of my all-time favorite shows. They're bringing it back, but like, what if it's not as good? Or when I was just nervous when the Star Wars movies come back. Like, what if they don't capture the magic in the same way as the originals? It's always very fraught with peril to bring something back that was popular some time ago, because it's even if it's as good, there are certain people that will always say, oh, but it's not as good as it was because like I have that nostalgic attachment to the original one. And nostalgia is, I always say nostalgia ain't what it used to be. Like it's a tough thing. It's tough to recapture the magic. It's why it's an interesting conversation from the Star Wars point of view that like every generation, you know how they say like every generation thinks that the best kind of music is whatever was around when they were 14 years old.
Yep. Yes.
Like I love 80s and 90s music because that's what was around when I was coming up. And I think every generation likes, whatever. Like I'm an original trilogy guy, right? Because I was around for the original films. But I think there are generations of people now that have grown up who grew up with the prequels, and that's Star Wars for them because it's what made an impression on them when they were young. And it's actually been interesting to see how the prequels have almost kind of like been through a reassessment. Right? Am I not wrong about this? Right? Like, I feel like people have been kind of like reassessing.
Oh, no,
I
think
100% correct.
I think you're spot on. I mean, I talk a lot about how. So in the 90s, that's how I got into doing this. In the late 90s, mid and late 90s, I was working for Star Wars Galaxy magazine. I was working along with Steve Sansweet, and I was covering the prequels and the re-releases. And I remember, walking out of, I covered the Phantom Menace premiere in New York City, and I remember walking out and being like, "Oh man, that wasn't what I wanted." But we have friends. Nick and I have good friends who are early 30s, late 20s, and like the prequels are it for them. And it's funny because I've now also gone back and reassessed them myself. And I don't know how much of it has to do with all the stories that have come along since then to sort of fill in gaps. But I also look at them a lot more fondly. Somebody asked me the other day which Star Wars movie is the one that I put on when I just want to watch something. And oddly enough, Phantom Menace came up in my like top 3 probably. And it's which I have to be honest, when I walked out of the theater in New York seeing it, I was like, I don't think I need to see that again. And then I became, but it has had a resurgence. And I think about my kids. I have a 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. They just had birthdays. And my 14-year-old, she was a fan of Rey, and the sequel trilogy is her trilogy. And when she's 25, 30 years old and watching it with that next generation, that's going to be it for them.
I was going to say there's a whole generation beyond that now that has grown up with the Disney era, right? That's going to be Star Wars for them. Like when I think of Star Wars, I think of Luke Skywalker and Leia and Han and Vader. Sure. But there's a whole generation now. When you say what does Star Wars mean to you, they'll say, "Oh, Rey, Kylo Ren, Finn." Like they'll Poe. Like that's it for them. And of course, all the TV. One of the things that occurred to me the other day, and it's kind of a staggering statistic when you think about it, is like there's been more live action filmed Star Wars entertainment made in the last 4 years than in the previous 40. Right. And it's not even close, right? When you add on all the hours of television, multiple seasons of Mandalorian and Ahsoka and Andor and everything else and everything else that's coming, there's even more coming. And it all, I think, has that challenge of like taking on their own merits. A lot of this stuff is very good Star Wars, right? But it has to, for a certain audience, people of my age, or our age, like everything's inevitably going to be measured against the stuff that we grew up with. And I think sometimes that's an unfair comparison to make.
Yeah. Do you think we've hit a wall with some of the nostalgia stuff? Like I look at Indiana Jones, which was a fun movie. It was fine. It wasn't my favorite indie movie. It wasn't my least favorite. But it was not met with the. I mean, I think Lucasfilm believed it was going to blow up. Believed it was going to be the big summer blockbuster. I mean, of course they do. They're spending a ton of money on it. But do you think have we kind of are we maybe in like the uphill of the roller coaster now where okay, nostalgia is behind us, or is it the content itself perhaps? I'm not sure.
I mean I think there's a couple of questions that have been in the air supply now for the last couple of years regarding it. Certainly in terms of Star Wars is like how much is too much, right? Can you ever have too much of a good thing? And I think that there's maybe an argument to be made for it in that, part of what made Star Wars magical was the scarcity of it, right? There wasn't really that much of it, right? Like Empire Strikes Back ended on this outrageous cliffhanger. I'd see you in 3 years, and that you had to wait. Yeah. And then there was this huge period all through the 90s where there really wasn't much of anything except the expanded universe books and video games kind of carrying the torch. And that's why there was so much excitement when Disney, said they were bringing it back. But they brought so much of it back. I mean, you've seen what happened, right? They basically said, let's back off for a while. Let's not make movies for a little bit because like we might have like over-egged the pudding a little bit. And so, I mean, who knows? I think it's hard to assess like as it's happening. I think years from now we'll be able to look back and decide whether or not this was a great era for Star Wars or not. But it's really, really hard. I think when you're dealing with major corporations that have paid billions of dollars for something to encourage them to like not overdo it, right? So we're gonna monetize this. We're gonna do a movie every year. We're gonna do TV. But I think you can get to a point, and I certainly feel this way about the Marvel movies, where like it's enough already. Like for me, like I haven't seen almost anything. I love the Marvel movies, but to me, they kind of ended like Endgame felt like such a natural stopping point. Like that was like 10 years of incredible movies, 20 incredible films, and it all came to a head. And here's the ending of it. I was like, great, I'm done. And since then, but no, Marvel's like, no, but there's still money to be made. Let's keep going. And anytime there's a financial imperative to make something that is supplanting the creative imperative, like, let's not make it because we have more stories to tell, but let's make it because if we don't, we're leaving money on the table. I always feel like that's a bit backwards. Hollywood's never going to learn that lesson. But like I tuned out of the Marvel stuff, A, because I feel like there's too much of it, and B, because it started to weirdly feel like homework. Like, oh, for this movie to make sense, you have to watch this TV show as well. And it's like, it's too much. I started to feel overwhelmed by it, so I just kind of tuned out. I don't think that's necessarily the problem that Star Wars has. I'm not saying Star Wars has a problem at all, but it's been interesting to go from like famine to feast with nothing in between. And we're seeing it with Star Trek as well. There was no Star Trek on air for many, many years. Now there's like five shows. Like everything is back, but it's back in such a like a all you can eat kind of way that I don't know if that's kind of depleted like the specialness of it, that there's we don't have to wait for the next thing. Like as soon as one TV show ends, another one begins, and it's like all you can eat Star Wars, all you can eat Star Trek, all you can eat Marvel. And I just wonder if like a little bit of magic has been lost because we don't have to wait for anything animore's no anticipation.
Yeah, well, I just posted a little video essay about the challenge that Star Wars faces right now is this sort of, because there is so much content. I wonder if they've gotten to a point where, like Marvel, as you were just saying, do you need to watch everything? Do you need to be up to speed on everything? As somebody who worked on Rogue One and has spent time with the story group and John Knoll and all those folks, is there a lot of sort of pressure to make things? I mean, Rogue One is a really bad example, I suppose, right? Because that's like the ultimate connector. But is there? Do you think, as a fan, maybe is a better way to ask you, as a Star Wars fan, do you feel like, gosh, if I missed 3 seasons of Clone Wars, I'm out of it, or do you think it's effectively bringing in the broader audience?
I mean, I can't speak to how well Star Wars is managing that, or like, that feeling that it kind of feels like homework because it's also interconnected and these pieces don't stand by themselves. Because I haven't seen enough of the new Star Wars TV stuff to really be able to kind of comment intelligently on that. I do know that with Marvel, it really did start to feel like a chore. It started to feel like homework, and so I was just done. We all love to see the crossovers. It's, there's Captain America's shield in the background. Like the first time that we saw that was really cool. It's like, what does this suggest? But now there's so much of it that, like, for example, the new Captain Marvel movie that's coming out, again, maybe I'm wrong, but like it seems like you have to have seen the Miss Marvel TV show to get like the full experience, and I haven't. It's like, do I have to go watch that first?
Right.
And so I don't know. It's a little bit much, and I don't know. Again, you can have too much of a good thing, and I think Disney, like a lot of companies in Hollywood, often take the wrong lessons from success. It's like, oh, you enjoyed that, perhaps you'd like 20 more of that. It's like, no, enough is enough. And so I don't know if companies will ever learn that. I think, you know, pulling back on the movies a little bit, they recognize that maybe it was too much of a good thing all the time. We'll be interested to see like how that settles going forward, like what Star Wars can look like. Star Wars is having a very specific era right now where there's a lot of it. It's primarily on television instead of film. And there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, like big blockbuster video games, and that's all very cool.
Yeah.
In 10 years, 15 years now, we'll be in another era. Like Star Wars is never going away. It's just going to continue to evolve. It will be, I think sometimes, like right now, I would not try to judge this era of Star Wars. I think a lot of this stuff only, like a lot of people hated The Empire Strikes Back when it first came out. And now look,
right.
It's like sometimes you need to have the benefit of some distance and some historical perspective to look back and go, oh yeah, remember that Disney era with all these TV shows? That was great, or that was not so great. I think it's too early to say.
Without a doubt. Well, speaking of new things, there's another exciting new thing that is going on for you right now. And I want to take us to a point where we talk about Gundog, because I'm fascinated to hear you tell us about what it is, the concept, where it came from. But Gundog, I know, is an audio drama. It's a book that you've got that has just come out, if I'm not mistaken. Give us the background on that. Tell us what it is. Tell us, you know, where you've kind of journeyed with this to this point.
I mean, first of all, yeah, it's the reason I'm here today, and I've done this in the past, and I have to admit it's completely shameless. That when I have something new, being involved in Star Wars, as much as a gift and a blessing as it was, like when I first saw my name up on the Starfield with the blue letters and the John Williams music playing, like I was like, oh my God, like my 10-year-old kid had a heart attack, you know, the one inside of me. And there's nothing better than that. I remember when I saw the premiere with Chris Weitz, one of the other writers in the movie, was sitting next to me, and when the credits rolled, he kind of nudged me and said, "We're in the blue letters," and I was like, "Oh my God, you're right!" It's like, like that's the dream, right? To have your name in those letters, and then George Lucas is the next name up. Like it's insane. And so, but obviously, it's also what I'm most known for. Like it would probably be the first thing on my bio for the rest of my life, because what am I ever going to do that's bigger than Star Wars? And that has been mostly a blessing, sometimes a curse, but not really. But like when I do the conventions and stuff, like I meet more Star Wars fans than any other. I've done other things, but Star Wars is primarily what people know me for. And when I have something new to do, I mean, it says right here on the cover of the book from the co-writer of Rogue One, because of course you're going to put that there. But it also means that I do very shameless things like call up Star Wars podcasts and say, hey, can I come promote my book? And I'll talk about Star Wars a bit as well if you want. So here I am.
If it helps, this is a very symbiotic relationship, because we've both wanted to talk to you for a very long time.
Good.
So we are just as willing to use this opportunity for you to talk about Gundog.
Oh, and I remember like
all of these conversations.
When the audio version was doing the rounds a year ago, I was calling up like every podcast, because I've done a lot of them over the years, and there's some really good ones like Talking Bay 94, and there's a lot that I really like. Star Wars Friends is a really good one. And I had previously done just Rogue One related stuff with them, but then I would call them back and say, hey, can I come back and talk about my new projects? And they're always like happy to have me, and there's always something new to talk about. Like I think I've told every Rogue One story yet. There's still like a bunch left, I'm sure. Everyone knows like the coffee cup story and a bunch of others, but like there's others. I'll be able to dine out on it for the rest of my life. So again, it brings me here. So basically what happened was, I also write other things. I do my favorite stuff to do is my own original stuff. The movie that gave me a career was The Book of Eli with Denzel Washington. That was the first thing I wrote that got made into a movie, and that led to Star Wars and everything else. And as much as I love to play in like the greatest sandbox toy box of all time, which is Star Wars, I often say, like when I was a kid, I used to play with my Star Wars action figures, and I would kind of like bash them together like this and like tell little stories and like make them fight and stuff like that. I still get to do that now, except they pay me to do it, and the action figures cost $100 million, right? Which is, and then they make it into a movie. But it's the same thing. Like it's literally when I was sitting around with Garrett, it's like, well, what if they did this? What if they had a fight? And like you're figuring out the story. So that's what I'm most known for, but it has also given me a platform to promote the other things that I do. And last year, I had this idea. I love mechs. I love the whole Japanese anime manga culture of mecha. I like, Gundam and Neon Genesis, and I like Transformers, just big giant robots kicking the shit out of things.
Absolutely.
Like, that's so cool. And I always wondered, like, why it's so popular in Japan, right? But like, why isn't there? Why aren't giant robot tanks as cool in America as they are in Japan? Like, we have Mech Warrior and BattleTech and things like that, but they're very niche. They're very nerdy. Like, there's no mainstream, there's no like mech version of Star Wars, but I feel like there should be. People go, "Oh, Robot Jocks." That was like from the 80s. That's the only one. And now I guess kind of Pacific Rim, right? Which is as much a kaiju movie as anything else. But I mean, those are mechs, right? Those Jaegers are mechs. You've got a pilot inside a giant armored, bipedal war machine. That's a mech,
right?
But I wanted to do my own version of it, and I wanted to do like a Western, very very Western version of it. The whole thing's kind of set in the American Midwest, and so I basically, it's a long-winded way of saying all of my ideas initially, I think, what could it be, a movie or a TV show? The problem is, and this is something I've become, I think, hopefully smarter about, is 10 years ago, I might have tried to write Gundog as a feature film screenplay. But what I've learned is no one's ever going to make it, because I'm not J.J. Abrams. I'm not Christopher Nolan. I can't, even though I have Star Wars and other things on my resume, no studio is going to spend $100 million making a mech movie that's not based on some underlying property or like a hit thing or whatever.
Right.
The analogy I always use is if Suzanne Collins had written The Hunger Games as a screenplay, I guarantee you none of us have heard of The Hunger Games, because no one makes that movie. Right. But she wrote it as a book that sold a squillion copies, and so Hollywood was like lining up to make the film. And so for me, I thought, rather than write a screenplay that I'm going to pour my heart and soul into, and then like no one's going to buy, and I'm going to be sad about it, maybe there are other ways to it doesn't have to be a film, right? Maybe there are other ways to bring stories to market. So back in 2015, I had an idea for a horror, like a medieval horror thing I wanted to write. It's like, no one's going to make that movie, but I wrote it as a book, and the book got published, and people enjoyed it, and it was successful. And I got to do what I want to do, which is like tell stories that find an audience in whatever medium that may be. So when I had the idea for Gundog, it was the same equation. Oh, no one's ever going to make it. It would be cool as a movie, but no one's ever going to make it. I'll write it as a book instead. And this was during the pandemic, and my wife listens to a lot of audiobooks. She has an Audible subscription, and she listens to audiobooks all day long. And what I learned is that audiobooks, like, I don't know if you noticed, it's like a third of the market. Like 1 out of every 3 books that are sold are an audiobook. So like you have to kind of do an audiobook if you want to reach everybody that might be interested in your book. And I thought, I'm going to do this all myself. I'm going to self-publish the book. I'm going to self-produce the audio version. It's audio. How hard can it be? Well, it turns out, like anything you want to do well, it's actually really hard. But I had that same luxury that I had with Animal Talking, which was also during the pandemic, that there was a lot of actors sitting around with nothing better to do. And so I was able to reach out to some friends of mine, Shannon Woodward, who was on HBO's Westworld, Troy Baker, who of course was in The Last of Us, and say, hey, would you be interested in narrating, performing this audiobook? And for no money, they wouldn't take a penny of my money. They just did it because it was a fun, cool thing to do. They recorded 9 hours of audio, the entire book. And we put it out as a free podcast last year. You can go to any podcast service right now, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, wherever you get your podcasts, you can type in Gundog, and the 9 episodes are there. And it's basically the whole book in audiobook format. Now let's just give it away for free and see what happens. And it ended up being super duper successful. But that came out first. And so the weird thing is, typically you would think of the written book as the main thing, and then the audio book as like the side project. Just because of the way the timing worked out, the audio book came out first, has been out for a while, and it's only now, almost a year later, the actual kind of literary, like written book that all of that was adapted from is now coming out on September 12th. So we kind of did it in a bit of a backwards way, but it's been really fun to do a project where no one can give me notes, no one can tell me what to do, because no one else is writing the checks, and no one can cancel it. Like, I've worked on so many movies where like it got canceled for like one studio bought another studio, now your movie's dead. It's no fault of yours. It's just stuff that happens, like, like layers above your pay grade. But the nice thing about doing something smaller and more agile and not terribly expensive to do, like an audiobook or publishing a novel, I never have to worry about like, is this all going to be a waste of time? Like, will anyone ever see this? I know it will, because I can self-publish it, and I have enough of a social media following that I can I can promote it and I can come places like this and talk about it. In the end, a real publisher did pick up the book because the podcast was so successful, but it's exactly the book that I wrote. Like some people, oftentimes with Rogue One, people will say, oh, I liked this or I liked that. And I should say, oh, well, thank you very much. If it was something I contributed to the movie, or I might say, if somebody says, for example, oh, I love like Chirrut Bays, I'll say, well, you should tell Chris Weitz that because he created those characters. If you want to talk about K2SO or Krennic and other, like, I'll happily talk to you about that. But like, I won't take credit for anything I didn't do. And movies are often like that, a melange of different writers who all contributed, something to it. Even something like K2SO, you were asking me before the show, like, did I create K2SO? K2SO has got like all these different creators. Like John Knoll originally created him, but I remember he was like a rebel logistics droid, like a C-3PO type droid. And I was the one who said, well, wouldn't it be cool if he was like an Imperial droid who had been captured and reprogrammed? And so he became that. And I decided to make him very mouthy because I think the idea was that it never made it into the movie, but in the backstory, my idea was like when you're an Imperial droid, you're very, you almost have like a behavioral restraining bolt, like, yeah, yes, sir, no, sir. And you have to like, jump to orders. But once he gets liberated and they take that, I think they kind of remove that from his programming. And if he wants to tell you to, shove it, he can. He's going to do that. He's like, oh, finally, I can say what I think. And so he really, really does. And he became very opinionated and very mouthy. And then subsequent writers, Chris and others, continued to build on that. And then Alan Tudyk comes along, right, and adds the vocal performance and the motion. And Hal Hickel and other people at ILM like create, the movement in the movement in the eyes. And there's so many. When you say like who created at K2SO, the answer is like so many people. And I'm just glad to have like a little piece of it. But what's nice about something like Gundog that I created myself is like whatever you liked about it or didn't like, I will take all of the credit and all of the blame because it's all me. And that's nice it's a nice feeling to have.
Well, I have to tell you, while we're on the top, I'm sorry, Pete. While we're on the topic of K2, I was at Dragon Con just this last weekend in Atlanta, and on Thursday evening, I attended the Star Wars Family Feud that was hosted as a panel. And one of the questions was, however many answers were on the board, name a Star Wars droid with the most personality. K2 was number 3, right behind Chopper and R2. So that sass, that that mouthiness that was built into him certainly has a payoff even going forward.
And Chopper is if people ask me who's my favorite Star Wars droid, it's Chopper, and it's not even close. I was so glad to get to work on Rebels because I got to write for there's a bunch of characters that I never. Rogue One obviously was amazing, but it has a very limited remit. It's telling a very specific story. With Rogue One, with Rebels, which bounces around and like is more expansive in terms of the characters and the events that it covers. It was a real thrill for me to get to write because I came in on the 3rd season, so the show was already established. Oh, I get to write for Chopper. That's so cool. Oh, I get to write for Hondo and Asmorgan or Thrawn and Saw Gerrera, like just all these fun characters that come from the Rebels. Or come from the universe outside of Rogue One. Saw obviously existed in Clone Wars before we brought him into Rogue, and so that was really fun. And writing for Chopper is like one of my favorite things to do. He's hilarious.
For sure. Well, I'd love to follow that.
Did you write English word? Let me just ask a real quick question. Sorry. Did you write English for him?
It's funny. I get that all the time. I get that question all the time. And it's the reason why I'm able to say I enjoyed writing for Chopper is you're not just writing bleeps and bloops. Like this was a secret all during production. And then after the finale, it was revealed that Dave Filoni does Chopper's voice. He actually goes into a booth and records it. And then it goes through all that kind of post-processing where it becomes basically unintelligible. But he's speaking English. And by the time they're done, you can barely if you listen real close, you can. I still think this again. This is my personal theory. This is still what I believe. But Chopper's first line in Rebels in the pilot episode, I can't remember exactly the circumstances, but I think Kanan or someone's late getting back to the ship, to the Ghost, and like Hera says, like, "What kept you?" And Chopper goes, "More, more, more." But if you listen really closely, I swear he's saying, "Yeah, what the fuck?" Like that's a very Chopper thing that he would say.
There are definitely some times throughout Rebels where I would agree with that 100%.
But the nice thing about it is, no, you do actually have to write the dialogue, and so no one's ever going to understand what he's saying. But like, when Hera says, "Well, that's your opinion" or whatever, like, I know she knows what he said, and so as the writer, you kind of have to know what he said as well. And so I got there's a lot of like hilarious Chopper dialogue that no one will ever know what it was because it only exists on the page of the script. But that, yeah, getting to write Chopper's actual dialogue, and like, trust me, if you can actually read the dialogue, he's so much worse than you think. But yeah, he's a ton of fun. Filoni said to me once, the key to understanding Chopper is if R2-D2 is the loyal dog that is happy to see you and will bring you your slippers and can be trained to do amazing things. Chopper is like the cat that doesn't give a fuck about you and just does what he wants. And once you understand that, you know how to write Chopper.
You've got it figured out. Well, and I want to follow this thread for a minute talking about writing on Rebels, because I am a person, we're all of the same generation and age, grew up with the original trilogy. And I say all the time, like, I was not the target audience for Rebels when it came out. I was older, but I maintain that, especially in this Disney era, everything's fantastic. I love, there are lots of things I love. There are things that I wish were different, whatever. But Star Wars Rebels to me is one of the most special Star Wars things we have gotten in a really, really long time. All 4 seasons of it, the lore, the story it develops and tells. And so I would love to just hear from you as somebody who had the opportunity to write, especially in seasons 3 and 4, because that's when it really kind of hits fast forward and we really get into this Jedi story, Kanan and Ezra, Ahsoka, Thrawn, of course. It's such a special part of Star Wars that we've gotten in the last, however many years. And I just love to hear your thoughts and take on that.
Yeah, I wish we could get people away from the notion that if it's animated, it must be for kids, right? And obviously, all Star Wars is for kids, right? It's inherently children were and are the audience. It's now that a lot of those kids have grown up, so now it has to be for man children as well, I guess, for the grown ups. But Star Wars, I think George like famously said, literally, Star Wars is for 12-year-olds, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, as a 12-year-old, you can totally understand everything that's going on and totally get into it. And so some of the better Star Wars storytelling happens in Rebels, but I think a lot of people will never experience it because no, I'm not going to watch the kiddie show. No, watch it. There's some really, really good stuff in there and some really hardcore stuff, especially as it gets, like you said, in seasons 3 and 4, as it gets closer to, BBY0, whatever you want to call it, like that point. It does, one of the reasons why they brought me in was it started to cross over with the Rogue One, like the timelines were getting really close. And it made sense to have Saw Gerrera in an episode, and so I wrote that episode. But yeah, there's some really, really good stuff there, and I really recommend that if you're a Star Wars fan that like has skipped Rebels, it's really worth getting to. Even if you're not like totally digging it right away, like it gets better and kind of matures as it goes to the point where some of the Rebel stuff that we did is like among my favorite Star Wars that I've written, even including Rogue One. Some of my favorite stuff's in there.
Yeah, it's really special, and that's what I love about it.
And it was an opportunity to kind of like scratch some itches that I never got to on Rogue. Like there was a lot of stuff I wanted. I love Saw Gerrera, and I love the idea that he was kind of like the political antithesis of Mon Mothma. Where Mon Mothma was like, no, there's a diplomatic, we don't want to have to go to war if necessary. There's got to be a way to resolve this. And Saw Gerrera was like, again, it's like, no, we just have to like blow them up. Like you have to play by their rules, right?
That episode with him as the hologram.
Yeah, that's me. So that was me, and that was one of my favorite things to write. And because Gareth originally came from Gareth saying like Star Wars has typically always been white hats and black hats, right? Like in Star Wars, there's no question who the heroes and the villains are. He said, I'm more interested in shades of gray. So that's why you end up with characters like Cassian and Galen Erso and who we were just talking about. You saw who are more like morally ambiguous. There are rebels who do bad things, and there are Imperials that try to do good things. And that was obviously kind of allowed us to do some more nuanced character work. But Saw was kind of, to me, was the most he's my favorite character in Rogue One because I think he's so interesting in the sense that like where do you draw the line between like a freedom fighter and a terrorist, because he is definitely right on that line, if not completely over it. And I just always imagine, I love the idea that the rebellion kind of fracturing because Gerrera and Mon Mothma just can't see eye to eye on like the best way to prosecute the war against the Empire. And I wanted to get into that more. And I mean, obviously it's there. Like you can tell that Mon Mothma, like when she says like he's politically like actually a liability for us now because of the stuff that he does, like this militant splinter faction, like when he blows up a bunch of civilians that happen to be near a Imperial convoy that he's going to, like that blows back on the rebellion. That makes us look bad because they just think all rebels are the same. But the rebellion's essentially disowned Gerrera, right? And he's not doing that for us. Like he's like a hardcore militant guy. And I wanted to get more into that, but it slowed the movie down to do so. And so a lot of that stuff fell by the wayside. But then I got to come back to it on in Rebels, and that speech that you just referenced with Guerrero and Mon Mothma, when he says, you know, when he says to Mon Mothma, I hope one day when the Empire's ruling the galaxy that you'll find some comfort in the knowledge that you fought according to the rules. Like that to me is Saw Gerrera in a nutshell. Is like, you can't, like, the Empire's has no restrictions on how they fight, and so you can't have those either, or you know, you're tying one hand behind your back. I always wanted to get into that in Rogue One, but I then got to do it in Rebels. So Rebels kind of felt like the continuation of a lot of the Rogue stuff that we wanted to do in the movie.
Awesome. I mean, it's so cool that you got that opportunity, because I've said it on our shows. We do our live Friday night shows as well. We talk about that episode a lot, because I think that you had, I say it all the time, in 1977, when I saw Star Wars in the theater, when you were young and you saw it in the theater, it was good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys were rebels. And when you have an adult understanding of what rebels are, they're not necessarily, they're not clean, right? Their hands are not clean. And so
it's not tidy.
I always think about also in Rogue One, where sort of Mon Mothma kind of rolls her eyes when they start talking about Saw Gerrera. You got that sense. So it sounds to me like you were planting the seeds, but then when you watch that after Rebels, now you know why she's rolling her eyes, why she doesn't want to engage with him. And it's such a beautiful connected story. And again, to your point, if you're not watching Rebels, you're only getting the surface story. And then back to the question I had before, like, how does Star Wars work through that?
And to go back to my point about like the interconnectivity of things, a lot of Star Wars fans are rightly excited about Ahsoka right now. There are people out there saying it's essentially season 5 of Rebels, right? Because so much of Rebels got carried over into live action that's a show where if you want to watch Ahsoka, but you haven't watched Rebels, you might get more out of Ahsoka if you watch Rebels, because a lot of the stuff is established there. A lot of those characters obviously come from Rebels.
Yep. For sure. So let's just take one half step back as we're coming up toward top of the hour here. I want to ask you a little bit about your initial Star Wars, when you first saw Star Wars, and why. We've been asking a lot of our guests lately, why is it that it impacted you? Why do you think, and what stuck with you? So tell us about your first Star Wars experience, and how it changed your life from that point forward.
In terms of the why, I don't know. When I was working on Rogue, I really kind of gave it a lot. I don't have the luxury of just like not thinking about this academically anymore. Like, you have to understand, like, what is it about Star Wars that makes it work? Because we had to build more Star Wars, and so I read a lot of kind of thesis stuff about the theory of Star Wars, and obviously all the kind of the classic kind of Campbellian hero's journey elements, and Hidden Fortress, and all of that stuff that kind of lead, and Flash Gordon and Westerns, and all the things that the kind of melange that Star Wars is made out of. I went back and watched all of George's student films. Like, it wasn't helpful at all, but it was really interesting to watch them. And I read a bunch of stuff about like why Star Wars kind of has that kind of magic to it. But at the time when I was a kid, like, you're not thinking about that stuff. You're just being transported. And I remember I was too young to see the original Star Wars in the theater. I was 5 years old when it came out, but I saw Empire and was blown away. But the one that really did it for me, and it to this day, like, I still will defend Return of the Jedi. No. I will defend that movie to the day I die. Maybe you don't like the Ewoks, that's fine. But it's a brilliant movie. It's the movie where it all comes to a head. All of the stuff with Jabba is incredible. The Battle of Endor is still the best, I think, still the best space battle ever put on film. And the Battle of Scarif is heavily influenced by it in a number of ways. Because like the way I originally wrote the Battle of Scarif was like as a tribute to the Battle of Endor. There's a battle on the surface, a battle in orbit, and they're kind of like interconnected goals. Big capital ships to give this smaller fighters like a sense of movement and that kind of stuff, relative speed. So I love Return of the Jedi. I saw it at 11. I saw it when I was 11 years old at a theater in London, and I cried at the end. It was the first time I ever cried at a movie because it's just so emotional, right? Anakin comes back and saves his son, and everyone's happy at the end, dancing around with the Ewoks, and I just was like so overwhelmed. And I remember, I tell you the exact specific moment was during the battle when the fighters and the Falcon are kind of skimming the surface of the Death Star, and they barrel roll like inside the superstructure, and now they're flying inside the Death Star. I remember that specific moment. I was like, oh my God, I was so blown away. And I remember thinking, whatever feeling this movie is giving me right now, this feeling of like pure magic and being transported to another place, That's what I want to do. That's what I want to devote my life to, is like making other people feel the way this movie is making me feel. I never knew that it would lead to me actually working on Star Wars in such a direct way. But like one cool thing that came out of that was when I was first working on Rogue, we got to go to the ranch, and I was at the Skywalker Archive where all the props and costumes and everything are kept. And that aperture that they fly when they barrel roll into it, and they fly through the aperture into the superstructure, that model is there, and it's like 5 feet tall. And I actually got to see it in real life. And I thought back to that catalytic moment of like, I want to write this kind of stuff. And I cried again, like as a grown man at the archive, because it was like, oh my God, this is where it all began for me. So yeah, it was again, I'm an original trilogy guy through and through.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, and mine in that moment is as the Falcon's escaping the Death Star, and it's in that section with the flames coming behind it as it's exploding behind it, and it's just the constant as it's passing by the camera.
Every now and again, Todd Vaziri or Hal Hickel or someone will post something on Twitter from that sequence, and we'll end up going like nerding out on it for about 20 minutes. But it's the other one that comes up a lot. And I like wasted half a day on Twitter just talking about this one shot. Is after they knock out the reactor and the reactor's collapsing and it just explodes, and as they fly into the tunnel, the explosion's framed within the tunnel. It's such a beautiful piece of shot composition. And the other one of the fighters, there's an A-wing, a couple of X-wings, and the Falcon are all skimming the surface of the Death Star. And that sense of like speed, they're so fast, and the way they kind of arc in and out of the shot. And it's just so exhilarating. And I don't know if I've ever seen anything as cool as that. Like 40 years later, I haven't seen anything as cool as that.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. And now, so to bring this back to Gundog a little bit, you were inspired, to be creative. Where do you want to see Gundog go? As a video game guy, could you see, a Gundog video game or something along those lines? Do you think that there's that, or maybe it's not? Does it become a franchise, or is there something else in your mind that you're looking toward to continue that creativity?
I did another interview this morning, and one of the questions was, are there any similarities between Dakota, who's the protagonist of Gundog, and Jyn Erso? And I'd never really thought about it like that. But then I thought, oh, wow, they're actually kind of like, they're both like, rebels who don't like authority, who kind of grew up without their parents in this like really harsh kind of war-torn environment. Dakota basically kind of grows up in an alien prison camp on Earth after aliens have conquered the Earth. And her parents were killed when she was very young, so there actually were all these subconscious similarities between Jyn and Dakota, and so there's this weird synergy there. But in terms of like where it might go next, I mean, the podcast was really successful. We were like a top 3 podcast in like 20 different countries around the world. It's still popular now, even though like we stopped publishing new episodes a year ago because it's a limited series. So that's encouraging, and the pre-orders and the book look really good. But like I originally kind of came up with an idea of a trilogy of stories. The first book ends in a way that suggests there's more and bigger stuff to come. But whether or not I'll ever write that is largely dependent on how much appetite there is for the first book. Like if nobody reads the first book, why would I write a second one? But if it's successful, I'd love to do more. And yeah, it's a lot. It's interesting that a lot of the stuff that I do is informed by my habits as a video gamer. There's a lot of often people pick up and you can tell that you play video games because there's a lot of stuff like that. Like in Gundog, like the mech, the Liberator that our heroes kind of find and use to fight the aliens has this ability to repair and rearm itself. Basically, it has a thing called a particle reprocessor that they stole from the aliens. And the idea is it takes a lot of damage in battle, but after it's killed all of the alien robots that are shooting at it, it kind of vacuums up all the scrap metal and reprocesses it into like new armor, new ammunition, and it can like constantly. And when you think about it, that's a very video gamey thing, right? Oh, you can there's things that you can pick up and collect and upgrade your weapons, and you can like repair and like level up. And it was again, I was never consciously thinking about it, but somebody spoke to me the other day about the idea of doing a video game. It's like, oh yeah, shit, this would actually map really well onto a video game because all of those things, upgradable weapons and the idea that you take damage but you can repair it. It's very video gamey, and that kind of stuff tends to seep into my work like subconsciously a lot because you're informed by the things in your life. I became a dad and suddenly started writing much more about like parents and families because that becomes the thing that you're interested in your life. And my decades of habits as a video gamer, I've got like just little kind of video gamey things that subconsciously seep into all my work. So yeah, a video game would be really cool. We talked about doing a graphic novel, and then here's the funny part. I said earlier, like I originally would have written this as a screenplay, but no one's going to make a movie based on nothing. The funny thing now is, of course, now it's not based on nothing, right? If the podcast is a hit, which it was, and the book hopefully is a hit, then you get to go to Disney or Netflix or whoever and say, hey, would you like to make something out of the hit podcast or the best-selling book? And that's kind of a weird way to get around from a purely creatively. It's satisfying for me to be able to publish a story without, being creatively meddled with or having to worry about someone canceling it because it's all me. But on the back end of that, the cherry on top theoretically is if you can find success as a book or a podcast or whatever, a comic, but whatever it might be, then you get to go around that problem. It's not original anymore, right? It's a piece of underlying. It's an underlying property, and you can say, hey, like 1 million people listen to this podcast, or 50,000 people bought the book. Like, you should make a movie out of it, and suddenly that becomes easier to realize, because that's the nature of the business that we're in now. Is original stuff's really, really hard to make. So my way of kind of like life hacking that is to make original stuff in another medium, and then see if people want to translate it into a movie or a TV show.
100%.
For sure. Yep.
Yeah.
It's Gary. This has been such an amazing last hour. Now I am so thankful that you have taken.
Yeah,
some
that
time
flew
to hang out
by
with us. It did. And here's the thing. You don't even have to have something new coming out. You have an open invitation. We'd love to hang out with you anytime. If you want to come back and talk, those untold Rogue One stories, if you want to hang out with us live on a Friday night, we'd love to talk to you more and hang out. But before we wrap up, before we get out of here, obviously we want everybody to check out Gundog. We want you to. I listened to the first episode of the podcast, just getting in prep for talking to you today, and I can't wait to listen to the rest of it. It's on.
Yeah, so like I said, the audio book, I left some money on the table here, but the audio, if you like to read audio books, the audio version is completely free. And it is an audio book. It's just chopped up into like 9 hourly episodes, or you can get the ebook for $10 on Amazon Kindle or Apple iBooks. And yeah, it's everywhere. I was quite tickled to see the other day that you can order it from Target and Walmart. Like the distribution on the book's been really good. So you can get it from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like basically wherever books are sold, you can grab it. And I found out, I don't know when this podcast goes out, but I found out that a bunch of retailers are breaking ship date and shipping it early. So some people already have it. Even it's not supposed to be out until next week, but that's kind of fun to see. Or since I'm still plugging, if you want to cut out the middleman, you can go directly to the publisher. You can go to inkshares.com/books/Gundog and order it directly from the publisher.
And listen, I'm going to throw it out there.
I told you I was shameless.
Yeah. No, I want to tell people, like, listen, if you go and you listen to it for free, spend $10 on the ebook as well, right? If you love it, just go just have it.
Support original creators. And part
100%.
of the reason why I am so shameless is a very different experience to me. When I did Rogue One, there's like a multi-million-dollar marketing budget, and the PR people would come to me with, okay, here's the 50 interviews that we've set up for you, and they're all like desperate to talk to you because it's Star Wars. When it's just me and an original thing that no one's ever heard of and a small indie publisher, I don't have a multi-million-dollar marketing budget. I don't have a multi-dollar budget. I have no money at all to market this thing. And so it's just me, going out and kind of making as much noise as I can on my own. So I'm again grateful to you guys for having me on.
Of course. Well, you're always welcome. And obviously Gundog is out and continuing to come out with the book and all of that. If anybody wants to find you on social media, where can they find you and track you down?
I'm on Twitter. At Gary Whitta. I'm on Threads and Instagram, G Whitta, YouTube, Gary Whitta. It's usually just some version of my name. I'm on TikTok, believe it or not. I'm way too old to be on TikTok, but I'm trying to
Me too, but here we are.
I'm trying to get into the whole book talk thing, because that's a thing, and I have a book. So I'm actually doing a thing right now where I'm kind of answering screenwriting and writing questions on TikTok. That's been really popular, and I'm just Gary Whitta on TikTok. So easy to find me there also.
I was actually at my local Books A Million about 2 hours ago, and in the front of the store, under a placard, was a thing that said Book Talk, and it had books listed. There
are books that have blown up huge because of Book Talk, and I think every publisher and every author's trying to crack the code of like how to like make a book blow up on TikTok. But the reality is, of course, we all know that like when things blow up, when things go viral, like they don't happen because somebody planned that. Like it's always a surprise. And like again, I put so much work into serious projects, but the stupid Animal Crossing talk show is the thing that blows up. Like you never know what's going to be the thing that people respond to. Yeah.
You never know. Well, it has truly been a blast getting to hang out with you. Thank you so much for being with us, and we truly appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you. before we let you go, I want to see if I can get you to do a little bumper for us. Would you do that for us?
Yeah.
A little audio here. I'm just putting it here over so I can put it up on the screen for you so you can. I mean, it's not brain surgery. This is Gary Whitta, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Yeah.
I probably don't need to type that up for you. You're a pro,
Well,
Gary. You know how to do this.
Just give me the line. What is it?
Yeah, this is Gary Whitta, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Okay, you want to get that now?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go for it.
This is Gary Whitta, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Perfect. Now I'm gonna hit the
look at that.
Yeah, I'm a pro.